anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly. We hope you enjoyed our coverage of the true crime monolith that is the Cecil Hotel. We're back today with the case that General Manager Amy Price found the most disturbing in her 10-year career with the hotel. And I just told Sam off air that I was like, I think I really need to hit record as soon as possible. So my genuine reaction after reviewing the end of this story is true on here for you all. This episode contains graphic content that concerns the health and well-being of adults everywhere. It also contains graphic content regarding a dog.
Oh.
Exactly. It is truly sad, but it's very compelling. So join us. But no, we're going to have to be strong together for this one to finish Amy Price's story. I recommend to everyone a Pinot Grigio. That's where I turned after hearing this story.
Well, I have a hot chocolate, if that helps.
Okay. If that feels like a warm hug to you, whatever feels that way, drink that.
See, I've been very cold all day. I needed something warm.
Heck yeah. Whatever feels like a good, nice hug, beverage, grab that. Because, wow, it is remarkably sad. But I want to tell Amy's full story here. So, regarding this story, Price said at the Cecil, behind the door of every room, there were secrets. But the one she found the most troubling, that took up the most space in her mind, enough that she entitled her book Behind the Door, was lurking in room 242. Price said in her book, quote, "Even now, when I think about what happened in this room, I get angry and sometimes I want to cry," end quote. And I won't lie to you guys, this one kind of makes me want to cry too. I don't often get this rattled. I will say that. It was the year 2009. Price had not yet been given the title of general manager, but had been performing all the duties of one. With all the public spaces of the hotel, there was a dedicated houseman who cleaned. One was responsible for the hallways and the shared bathrooms and showers. However, the rooms themselves were not cleaned by staff, and, quote, some of them hadn't been checked in many years.
Oh, wow.
Apparently, the previous owners had not seen inspections as a big priority, so the condition of the rooms of the tenants were unknown.
Oh, goodness.
The longer stay members typically had an agreed upon rent with the hotel, and the longer they had been there, the lower the rent. Obviously, the Cecil was trying to get rid of as many of these tenants as possible to open the rooms for rent. But the residential nature of the hotel took precedence, and basically all they could do was just wait these people out, which is not a great plan.
Is this... I know we didn't mention this in the last episode, but the Cecil essentially did split into two hotels, the Stay on Main and the Cecil.
Yeah.
Is this when it was Stay on Main as well, or before that switch?
I believe it is when both are operating.
Okay, because I know they did that to kind of rebrand and kind of get the negative aspects of the Cecil kind of out of the way to bring in more traffic.
Yeah, they were trying to do that. Like that, they were trying to, the youth hostel thing, get that, available to younger people who are probably checking out the city.
Mm-hmm. And so this is the Cecil side of it, even though Stay on Main was functioning at that point. Okay.
Yeah, Stay on Main is functioning, which is incredibly remarkable when it's joined to sort of like the back of the Cecil, not literally at the back, I mean at like it's kind of strapped to the Cecil's back, and you got to deal with all the Cecil's baggage while you're at Stay on Main. And that's part of her problem that she, mentions a lot is she just wasn't able to get a lot of the new construction, that even the most basic stuff that the hotel required. So she was struggling to make Stay on Main open, as well as cater to these people who she's kind of like painted into a corner with.
Right.
And like we were just saying, she had arrived, Amy, at the Cecil with the intent of making it over into a more proper hotel. And along with requiring IDs and credit cards to check in, which was much to the grumblings of the more transient members of the Cecil, it also instituted mandatory room cleanings. As it stood, the hotel was infested with various pests and really run down, so Price thought that this would be a good thing to dig into and take care of. And that's essentially what she was trying to do with Stay on Main. I think if Amy Price had had her way, she would have done the entire Cecil. You know, if she had had no roadblocks. It's just, unfortunately, she runs up, as we'll see in the story, they just keep stacking up in front of her, these roadblocks, to make the Stay on Main successful.
Just blows my mind that, like, even just the basics of requiring IDs and credit cards in 2009. I've been to a lot of pretty rundown hotels and motels in my day.
Right.
And I've never had an experience where you don't have to give an ID or a credit card.
I know. Can you believe that? They just, anybody who could afford, I believe we mentioned earlier in the episode, and by believe I mean remember it, because this is all I've been thinking about. The cheapest room in there was $35 in the female dorm.
Was there a dorm is a little different, but for like the long-term tenants, is there like a rent cap or something, like legally, where they aren't allowed to raise that rent?
I think that there has to be, because Price and Pedro, as we'll see, they go on through this list of tenants. And each one had an agreed upon rent when they moved in. So I imagine that it just kind of fluctuated with inflation, how much people were paying for rent, and then they were like grandfathered in. That's what I have to believe.
Yeah, because it seems to me like you should, like, with the renewal, you should be able to raise rent with the associated fees of improving the building that they're living in.
Yeah.
My rent goes up every year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mine does too. So that's why in reading this whole thing, I was like, okay, there has to be like an LA law or like some kind of Californian law that stipulates that your rent is capped, because they go through the tenant roll, right? Price talks to Pedro again, who we met in part 1, who's the hotel's sort of historian. And they're going through this tenant rent roll, and they come out with 80 tenants, and all of them are listed in an Excel sheet with their room number, their rent they paid, and the date they'd moved in. And so Pedro like walked Amy Price through each of these tenants and what she was dealing with. Because like we just said, she's sort of stuck with these people.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be an LA law that says you can't raise rent. I don't know what other reason would make people not leave, because also I think we'll discuss something about moving out of the Cecil that makes me think that there is definitely like an agreement there.
Yeah, because it just seems weird to me if they're not raising rent, even just minimally.
I know,
but it makes sense, like, to increase it depending on the work that's being done. And if she's struggling to get the work done, a great way to get that done is to raise the rent, provide better amenities for these people, and the people who can't afford it. It's just that's how it works. It sucks for people who can't afford it, but at the same time, it's running a business.
Exactly.
And there has to be a balance of the two.
I was going to say, she would just be doing exactly what she came there to do, which was rehabbing the hotel, you know? That's the reason they called her. That's the reason she stayed on for as long as she did. She really cared about the Cecil and about this vision of redoing the hotel. And so, like, if these new improvements had caused certain people to move away, I imagine that newer people would have gravitated toward it. I think if she only had her way, like her own kind of way to bulldoze through this red tape, that's what I think the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
And we're about to see the gravity of this problem. So 80 people, and it was then that they arrived at a name of a one Mr. Channing, and he's referred to as only that in the book. And next to this name was one Price hadn't seen before, a Dal Harrison. When asked by Price who it was, Pedro responded to Price with just, quote, the woman. According to Pedro's memory, Mr. Channing had been at the Cecil for a very long time, roughly 40 years. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, he's been there. And this seemed odd due to the file that he had, which said that he and Dal Harrison had moved in 2004. Pedro explained that 2004 was likely the date the tenants had moved from the upper floors down to the second floor. So that is when they're condensing those tenant units into like floors 2 and 3 so they can rehab the image of the other floors.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And so he likely agreed to move down from higher up. And Mr. Channing relocated to another room within the building. Immediately, Price clocked that she had never seen the woman, Dal Harrison. She had never seen her. She asked Pedro how long the woman had been at the hotel, and according to him, the woman had been brought into room 242 about 10 years after Mr. Channing moved in. So she had probably been at the Cecil for about 30 years.
So did they live together?
Yes.
Or were they like neighbors? They lived together.
No,
okay.
Lived together. Yes. Same room. And so they've been there. They've been there together for roughly 30 years. Channing has been there roughly 40. So
okay.
He kind of already had his wits about him at the Cecil. Like, saw it as his home. Had rent agreed upon, you know. But it was odd because in her 30 years' time at the Cecil, its unofficial historian Pedro could only say, quote, she is an Asian woman. She went into the room, but she didn't come out. Price was immediately alarmed and asked when the last time was that this woman had been seen. Chillingly, Pedro answered, quote, never. Apparently, in room 242 lived a woman brought in by Mr. Channing who had not been seen even once since.
So she wasn't even seen moving from the upper floor to the second floor?
You know, they may have, because, like, there are certain other instances here where people do get a glimpse of her. But it's like, one of the things I found the most perturbing, like, recounting this case, too, is that it almost feels paranormal. Like, it almost feels like this woman is a ghost. And people aren't seeing her, aren't considering her, aren't, like, it's wild.
Interesting.
Because everybody just, like, it's been, I don't know. I don't know. Because he went on to tell Price that the woman, whose name may or may not even have been Dal Harrison, in the early days of her stay, she could be seen in the hallway to the shower with just a sheet around her. Pedro could not recall ever seeing this woman in any clothing, just the sheet. Her hair was described as, quote, long, dark, and wild. Maybe it hadn't been cut in a very long time.
Bizarre. That's just odd.
Yeah, and it gets odder. It gets odder and more strange that this is happening. Like, a whole hotel is functioning around this, and this is happening. It's wild. Like, and here's something that is wild in a different way, as in wildly sad. Price quickly ascertained room 242 did not have a shower inside it. And after asking Pedro, they determined that the woman was not even coming out to shower anymore.
Something just seems very off.
Yes. Price describes Channing as, quote, in his late 60s when she arrived at the Cecil. He was about 6 feet tall, and he always wore a black hat over his gray hair. He used a cane, and as he walked, he always seemed to be making strange growling noises. His demeanor was very unpleasant and very unfriendly, end quote.
What year did she start at the Cecil again? So it would just be a few years before this, if that, at this point.
2007. Amy
Okay,
Price.
so she was only there for 2 years. So he's still late 60s, potentially 70, 71-ish.
Correct.
In all likelihood.
Correct.
Okay.
And this woman is still likely, same description, still.
Mm-hmm.
Price further stated that Channing almost never spoke to her, and when he did, she noted he had a very low and deep voice. She marked it as the deepest voice she had ever heard. So, now that we know the occupants of room 242, came the date that all tenants would be advised that their rooms were to be properly inspected. Price noted that enough notice was given to tenants that if they had wanted to clean up at all, they had the opportunity. The date to inspect room 242 grew closer until it was upon Price and Pedro to go knock on the door and perform the mandatory inspection. They noticed a TV was blaring from the room when they arrived at it, and after knocking, were told, quote, just a minute, from Mr. Channing. We know that because Amy Price recognized his very deep voice.
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go, guys. Price said that when the door to the room was cracked, quote, the smell almost caused me to fall over. Putrid, rank, rancid. I'm not sure if any of these words are enough to capture the insane stench of that room. It was like ammonia and rotten eggs caught in a steam room together, which made it very hard to concentrate. End quote.
Did any neighbors complain about smell?
You know, in her book, she never mentions that. And I wondered that myself. I was like, how did nobody... I wonder if it's maybe because they've grouped all these tenants together on floors 2 and 3. And I wonder if all these tenants are kind of around him and are accustomed to like this sort of mental illness, and they don't want to draw attention to themselves. They maybe don't have proper identification. Maybe that's what happened. But
Yeah, maybe.
I am quite curious as to whether anybody ever called down to the front desk in the time when he lived in the upper floors and in the time when he moved down to floor 2.
Yeah, because I just feel like you're living in an apartment. Like, I know.
Yeah.
I got home about an hour ago, and I'm walking past all my neighbors' doors, and I can smell what they're cooking for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's just dinner.
Absolutely.
Like, that's just what's on their stove at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. When you think about it, Price and Pedro had been inspecting all of these hotel rooms. So she's like really run the gamut. And this is the one that she's saying she can't even really grasp the right words to capture the insane stench of his room.
Yeah, that seems a little odd to me.
Yeah.
But no one reported it.
Yeah.
Even anonymously.
Yeah, you could so easily you could call down and tip them off, you know? And I wish they would have. I don't know if it would have changed anything, but I think if it made it very hard to concentrate when you're in there, it would make it very hard to concentrate when you're outside the door or next door.
Well, that's like even knocking on the door, you would probably smell it.
That's what I wonder. I'm like, were the hallways being cleaned by the houseman? But even if they were being cleaned, could you really clean over a smell like that?
Yeah, like I'm thinking, like, I'm assuming this is the body of the woman, just based on the description of the scent. I have never smelled a body before, but I've smelled my fair share of like rotting animals growing up in the middle of the woods and around hunting. I know what that smells like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's potent.
I will give you a glimpse here and should let you all know that the weirdest part about this story is that this woman is very much alive and very much normal. Normal is not correct for this at all, but she is very much alive.
Huh, interesting. Okay.
It's even weirder. It's even weirder. It's very hard to concentrate. She says it's awful. She informed Mr. Channing they were there for the mandatory room inspection, and she noted he was taking kind of a defensive stance with his cane, kind of not wanting to let them in. And he eventually relented and allowed them to inspect the room, but I doubt anything could prepare them. Amy Price said, quote, "My most vivid memory, beyond the smell, was the temperature. It really was like a steam room, so incredibly hot, and of course this intensified the smell. At first I thought the heat was due to the season. It was fall, the hottest time in Los Angeles. On top of that, the rooms at the Cecil were tiny and circulation was poor. Then I realized that in addition to all these causes of heat, Mr. Channing had a heater running in the room." End quote.
See, I can't judge him on that because my apartment's like a sauna all the time, and I love it.
I typically love a warm room as well. I'm just very puzzled by all these different sources of heat. Like, if it was that hot outside, I don't know why you would be running a heater, but we should.
Yeah, I can't. I've never been to LA. I don't know what the weather is technically really like in the fall. To me, fall's like 60s, 50s,
right.
Maybe.
Yeah, for us, it's not weird to run a heater in the fall because it starts to get cold as hell here.
But I wouldn't be opposed to running a heater on occasion in the summer. I really like it nice and toasty.
If somebody's blasting the air, I'm there for the heater as well. But I do think it's odd to have these multiple sources of heat all converging on this room. I don't know why.
And that definitely can't help the smell. That will definitely amplify that smell.
Absolutely. Keeping it that hot. And I'm baffled as to why you would need it that hot. And that's so, like, the only thing I could think to describe this was, after overcoming the incredible stimuli of the room, because we're about to see there's more yet, because we've just covered smell and we've covered temperature, and now we're going to cover occupants. Price was able to see on the bed, covered in a mess of white sheets, was the outline of a human body. She said it was immediately evident someone was hidden under this sheet. She asked Mr. Channing, "Is the person who's hiding under this sheet okay?" And Channing answered her in a grunt of, "Yes, she's okay." As Channing told Price this, she observed that while he was speaking, a cockroach was skittering among the sheets.
Ugh, gross.
Yeah, I know, you guys, it's bad. It gets worse. Price also then surmised that cockroaches had infested room 242 and stated they were everywhere she could see in the dozens.
Ugh.
I know. In this awful state, Price was immediately able to see why the cockroaches were invading. There were half-drunk liters of soda and open containers of food, quote, all over the room.
And I'm sure that adds to that smell, that rancid,
I know.
rotten smell.
Exactly. And I mean, we're city dwellers, so like when you say the word cockroaches, it's like, oh, it gives me a visceral shiver.
Right.
Like maybe that's for everybody, but like, especially for here where we're living in apartments, we're living right next door, sharing walls with each other. Like you say the word cockroach to me and I'm like, where? No. Like,
right, like keep that out of my home.
Exactly. Like, what brought it in here? How'd it get in here? What do we do to get it out? Because what Price said, one of the things that I actually took out, but we'll talk about it right now, was that the fumigator, he enters the picture later, he told her that if you see a cockroach in the daytime, it's bad. And so she's here, It's the daytime. Yeah.
Say, I'm lucky to have never had to deal with cockroaches. Knock on wood.
Oh, me neither. Oh, yeah.
And I did not know that, and that's horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. I've never dealt with cockroaches. Harrowing. So I can only, I don't think cockroaches bite you.
I think they can.
I think they can. Yeah. I'm sure they can.
I don't want to find out.
I don't either. Yeah,
but I think
exactly.
they can.
Exactly. Ugh. And Amy is feeling the same way we all are, you guys. She's appalled at the conditions Mr. Channing was subjecting himself to, but also the woman. She could tell that the woman was definitely alive. The conditions were so poor, get ready, that right next to the bed, Price, quote, noticed a bucket parked next to the bed. Amy instinctually knew that it was being used as a toilet because, as she said before, room 242 had no bathroom. End quote.
Oof.
Yeah, so it's harrowing. And her concerns are intensified for the two adults, particularly because there was still no responsiveness from the woman. So she asked Channing again, quote, "Are you sure that whoever is under that sheet is okay?" And she made sure to ask it more loudly to try and give the woman a chance to yell out. Price said that the woman did not only not answer her, but she did not even move.
Wow.
Yeah. And she has a lot of valid reasons for concern, but also she has to go through the steps of her job. So she has to kind of remain detached from this. And I don't know how she could have, because I can't stop thinking about it. But she somehow is able to maintain her professionalism, and she's able to tell Channing the conditions of the room are unacceptable and that he needed to clean. So this is the first warning issued by the hotel that he has to clean. She also told him that in addition to the required cleaning, she would be sending a fumigator to address the roaches. As we just mentioned, the one who told her, if it's daytime, it's bad. She's like, no, right now, get these cockroaches out.
Right.
In order to perform this, everyone would have to leave the room during an allotted time period due to the toxic nature of the formula. You know, I'm sure you guys are familiar if you've ever had the exterminator in.
Yeah, it's like tenting.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, like, they would probably tend up that whole room for at least a couple hours. Because if there's no bathroom, I mean, it's probably pretty small.
Right.
She said Channing only gave her, like, an unhappy grunt in response. And then she had no choice but to leave. Because she did everything she was supposed to do.
Right. You have to follow the procedure before you can take further action.
Exactly. And what you just said is pretty much the genesis of this whole episode. That, like, you have to follow procedure or else nothing can happen. And then sometimes even then things don't happen. I don't know. After seeing the woman's outline in the sheets, Pedro remembered another detail that he hadn't passed on to Price. He said that shortly after this woman, very likely not Dal Channing, arrived at the hotel, he had received a phone call from a man who lived somewhere in Asia. Pedro couldn't remember if it was China, Thailand, or Vietnam, but the man claimed that his mother had been, quote, taken to the hotel and was being held hostage, end quote.
Oh.
Yeah. And then Pedro informs Price that after this call, the management made no effort to connect with Channing or the woman. In fact, it was ignored altogether. Yeah.
Based on the history of the hotel, that it doesn't surprise me that it was ignored. But
I mean, you're right.
It's also kind of a big thing to forget about.
Exactly. Like, oh, I mean, a hostage situation? That, it seems hard to find anything more pressing than a hostage situation. Like, how did this just go ignored? And now we're all on the wheel, the hamster wheel with Amy Price of how is this going unignored? How can we help? How is this going? What's happening? And there was another report from Pedro regarding the woman. This time a person had actually come to the hotel looking for a, quote, missing woman, and nothing was done with the visit at all.
And do you know what year this all happened? That someone was called in from Asia and came visiting the hotel?
No. All we have is Pedro's memory there that we're relying on through Amy.
And do we know how long Pedro was at the hotel working?
I could probably dig it
So I'm
up.
just wondering, like, if this is a 30-year span, that's a lot of time.
I believe Pedro was on staff at the Cecil for. He probably started around the time Channing moved in. Like, he had been there longer
So
than
he'd been there
everybody.
for 30, 40 years.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. We're talking in the decades. Pedro has been with the hotel and not left. And so he's kind of become this unofficial historian. And I usually find at workplaces when somebody like calls you that, it's typically because you're the one who's been there the longest and you are just the one holding on to this sort of flow of information that may not necessarily be documented. That is my thought.
I'm just curious how long people have been searching for this woman.
Me too. We know at least people have been looking for her since 2009 through Amy, because the only thing we know now, as far as this, is that the woman has been there for 30 years, and nobody has cared to ask after her on staff of the Cecil this entire time until Amy arrives. And so yeah, I was just surprised with those kind of leads what happened. And so Price, she didn't think that bad press outweighed human suffering, and unfortunately her business partners disagreed. So she began her worry over the woman in 242.
Yeah, I understand the idea of bad press, but I also think there is good press that can come out of that, being like, look, there's new management.
Right.
These things that were happening are no longer happening. That's good press.
Exactly. Exactly. Why I don't understand why Amy Price was continually, I mean, well, it's because her business partner didn't care. That's it. It's straight up that. And Price said she felt, quote, the horrible truth was that if the woman wasn't asking for help, it wasn't going to be that easy to help her, end quote.
But isn't that more of a reason to get her the help that she may need?
We're going to see Amy does just that. Her first attempt to help was to send the fumigator over, and when the employee, Juan, came to the room, Mr. Channing and the woman were both there. And this surprised him, as he knew Price had informed them that he needed to spray with toxic chemicals, but they refused to leave, according to him. So instead of spraying, Juan did the second best thing he knew to help them, which was applying roach-killing gel to the baseboards around the room. And at this time, Price knew that Mr. Channing had not made an effort to clean, so she again asked him to. That's second time she's asked him. In conjunction with her asking him this, she was officially promoted to general manager. She hadn't been able to do much in her time between her second request and that elevation, but once she's promoted, she then made it her mission to help the woman hidden in 242.
I wonder what's required at this point to get to the point of eviction.
That's a good question.
Because to me, it sounds like this, just having the roaches and the non-compliance and all of that is getting pretty close to it minimally.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, anywhere here, they'd be like, get the fuck out. It's a really good question. Like, what does it take to get evicted here? I wonder if the hotel ever pursued proceedings. Maybe bringing on Amy Price and these inspections were the first step of them hopefully starting to get a way for them to evict these people, which, as we remember, is their main goal because they are a hotel. They want to rent the rooms.
Well, that's why I'm wondering, like, what is it going to take them? Like, obviously, there are legal steps, and I know that you have to give warnings and all of these different things.
Right.
But it sounds like you have the justification to escalate warnings given the inspections.
Yeah. Given that this is the second time, I don't know.
Like, I know there's a lot of issues with police, and I think it's a sheriff who needs to issue the eviction.
Because
we talked a lot in the last episode about having to call the police numerous times and hoping they
Mm,
would show up. And if they did, it was hours later. Like, I understand that, but this is a different scenario than calling 911.
right. Right. And Amy handles it very well. Like everything Amy does is what I would have done. And if I were put in the same, I can't imagine being put in this position. But if I were put in the same position, I would do what she does. And she began to take it more seriously in 2010. And she took note that Mr. Channing was a man of routine. He did the same things every day. He usually did them at the same time, and he did them daily. And he usually returned around the same time later in the day with food. Amy Price saw this as her way to help the woman. She thought with the predictable absences of Mr. Channing, she could reach out. She was tempered at first by the knowledge that if the woman wanted to leave, she could leave the room. He could not possibly have locked her inside. It was impossible due to the way the Cecil's locks functioned.
Right. But then you also have to think about there could be Stockholm syndrome or
Exactly.
agoraphobia or something like that.
And I came to the same exact conclusion, which is exactly what our girl Amy comes to. She became very concerned, and it even motivated her to Google, quote, is Stockholm Syndrome real love? She thought it was possible the woman was motivated by love for her captor, and Price began to think that this woman in 242 was suffering from a case of Stockholm Syndrome and had likely, quote, lost touch with reality. End quote. She makes the good point that the only person this woman had seen for 30 years was Mr. Channing.
Yeah, she may not even understand what the real world is anymore.
Like, and I love that your brain went right there, and so did Amy's, so did mine. Like, we're people of, if this, then what? What is the next step in the procedure? Like, how do we move toward action? And Amy was wondering about other factors as well that I'm sure you're probably thinking of, and I was, which was, did the woman speak English? Was she mentally stable?
Mm-hmm.
Why, if she both spoke English and was mentally stable, then why hadn't she spoken to Price when she entered the room? Also, at this point, what did the woman even look like? Amy still hasn't even seen her.
Yeah.
Price saw that with Channing's routine, this could be an opportunity. And so one day after he left the room, she called it. There was no answer on the line. Price tried a second time that day, still no answer. Without any answer, Price gave her another opportunity. This is a separate occasion from those two phone calls. While Channing is out, she sees the opportunity and she knocked on the door. She repeated these calls and knocking, which the woman could have used to express her distress for 2 more days. And she received no response each time she tried.
Yeah, if she is dealing with Stockholm syndrome, or even, as I said, even if it isn't a kidnap situation, it's more agoraphobia, which is a whole different kind of issue,
Mm-hmm.
she probably wouldn't answer.
Yeah. Yeah. It could be. It could be. Price couldn't understand why she wouldn't or couldn't answer the phone when alone in the room, but for whatever reason, like many of what we've just discussed, it didn't happen. Amy was admitting in the book that she was hoping these calls and this knocking would, quote, tune the woman into a new way of thinking, one that was driven by logic. That didn't happen, end quote. And I think,
Unfortunately, I think in these situations, logic is not a logical way of thinking.
yes,
Like, you can't
exactly.
rely on logic.
Right, right. You want to, but I feel like this is definitely the epitome of a case where being driven by logic is not gonna cut it. All the while that Price is performing these essentially wellness checks, months were going by. So she kept repeating this, like calling and knocking on the room. She's very worried. I don't blame her. I've been very worried.
So I don't blame her either.
Right. Like if you were the one in charge, I I would be worried. And monthly Channing would be notified of inspections on 242, and subsequently he was failing them. Every time Amy returned to the room, Channing, the woman under the sheet, and the roaches were there. He took it a step further, and when the fumigator Juan came monthly, each time applying roach killing gel instead of spraying because they would not leave, Mr. Channing would remove it from the perimeter baseboards. Juan said that he was just as confused by the woman hiding as he was about the removal of the roach gel. Apparently, according to Juan, the woman in 242 seemed very much alive as well. Damn.
See, again, this is why I'm so curious about eviction, because
Right.
I feel like this is, especially after months, that is
Right.
absolute
Months.
right for eviction.
Absolutely. And I mean, the Cecil is technically your landlord.
Exactly. Like they have the right to say you can't be here anymore because you're violating
Our policy.
our
Yeah.
policies as a business.
But you're gonna be blown away. Like I'm blown away by how, because Amy is so thorough and she does like everything she possibly can. Because she's performing these wellness checks, because he's failing these inspections. She knows the conditions are changing. She's still worrying. And I don't blame her. She began to explore a list of organizations to contact after her repeated ways to try to access the woman, coming up with nothing. She first called the health department, adult protective services, the fire department, and the police department. Like, first of all, round of applause, Amy. Out of the park, smashed it. I would have called every last one of those.
Well, yeah, I think that's also policy in your situation like this. Like, it's great that she did because it needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what you're supposed to do.
Right, exactly. Yeah, again, she's symbiotic thing here. She's both doing her job and she is very worried about this woman on a personal level. Because through her work at the Cecil, after seeing years of guests roll by her, Amy Price had developed a keen eye for mental illness, and she had the compassion to deal with it.
Which is something a lot of people don't have.
Yeah, exactly. You need to have a really, a unique spirit to do that. Because she saw that this woman was suffering from perhaps a partner with a hoarding disorder.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, that's all I can come up with too. She had seen it in other rooms and could only find it incredibly sad that another human would hit that point. However, she still wasn't sure if the woman was in there voluntarily. All she had to assume right now was that she was, because he couldn't lock her in there. And that's all she could do. Because again, she's just doing her job, and she can only do her job. She can only go so far.
Right.
Before, like what is the threshold? And you'll continue to ask yourself that. I know I did. The health department turned out to be most helpful of the services she contacted after filing a report of Channing's refusal to clean, despite the repeat notice from the hotel, and an official was sent to check out the room 242. When the health department arrived, Mr. Channing opened the door, and Price said that when he saw the official there, he immediately looked very angry to her. I imagine so.
Well, it's his own doing at this point, which that also might be a mental disorder that he's dealing with, that he's struggling to do the basics of his own care. But
exactly,
he was given the warnings.
Right, multiple warnings and multiple failed inspections. It's just like it tugs at you because you're like, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do, but like this is unacceptable.
Right.
Like this is not good for you, for whoever this woman is, for the hotel, for anybody. It's not good. So I'm really glad that Amy called everyone she did. But it does make me sad that she had to call all of these different services just begging for help. Like, why did she have to do that? I don't know.
Well, it sounds to me like he has some sort of mental disorder that is causing this behavior.
Oh, yeah.
And it could be like seems pretty extreme. So this is what you need to do in these situations.
Yeah, what I just don't understand is why she had to kind of work at it and work at it and work at it as much as she did. And we'll see as she does until with no result. Because the health department official, he sees these conditions and he is adamant that they're not okay for either of the adults. And he wrote Channing a, quote, fix-it ticket. The official made no special mention to Price about the woman hiding, and the fix-it ticket changed nothing about the situation.
Which that doesn't really surprise me that a ticket.
Yeah, they ticketed
Well,
him.
it's
Yeah.
a piece of paper. It's a piece of
It's
paper.
a ticket, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, there needs to be more action beyond that, but you have to have that first.
Right. Yeah, you're right about that. And it had about as much effect as you would imagine. It changed nothing. Nothing except that Channing decided he would add a dog to the mix.
No. I'll say Rigby's sitting in my lap right now, and he's not a dog, but he pretends to be. And I'm just...
I know. Dogs are not allowed at the Cecil. Well, my baby is asleep on the couch right now, baby Arthur. And oh God, that's why I had to give the trigger warning up top for animals too, because I just am like, oh, this is devastating. Like, it's a different kind of orbit of sad.
Right. Yeah. I'm just gonna let him cuddle me on my lap for a while, because I know it's gonna get sad.
Yeah, and clearly Channing, it's not registering at all. Like, none of this, like, all of this seems okay to him, I think, because, yeah, again, dogs aren't allowed at the Cecil, and Amy Price informed Channing that as she watched him bring in the dog, and he completely just walked past her. Like, she told him, like, hey, you can't do that. He's just... I know that with hoarding disorders, people don't mean to be insubordinate, but they are, from what I've seen.
Well, and some people just don't care about the rules. Like, we had, in my building, there's no dogs allowed in my building. And a few months ago, there was a young couple who had a puppy here. And I would run into them in the elevator all the time. And they were gone within like a month. They got kicked out.
Yeah. See?
And it was like, it's just that they're not allowed to have it here. It was a really cute puppy. It was very well behaved, but they're not allowed in the building.
And so it doesn't surprise me at all that the Cecil, which is a hotel, does not allow dogs.
Yeah, well, a lot of it is just like the barking, or like that can disrupt neighbors.
Absolutely.
Like, it makes sense. I understand why buildings don't allow it.
I do
but
too.
It needs to be enforced.
Right, yeah.
And based on my building, and maybe LA is different, but like those neighbors were kicked out of my building within a month.
Right, yeah, that's fast.
Like, that's absolutely grounds for eviction.
Right.
Based on my experience.
Yeah. I mean, if even one of your neighbors rats on you, you could get kicked out.
Say, I didn't rat on them because the dog was really cute and super well behaved.
Right.
But I know that other people did.
Right. Like, you guys can take that chance and run the risk of eviction. But like you just said, Price also said this dog was untrained and it, quote, was a vicious, unwashed, 30-pound animal that seemed feral and it barked all the time.
Is it 30 pounds? That's pretty big for an apartment dog.
Arthur is 26 pounds, for your reference. Viewers, sorry, I will...
We'll post a picture of him on Instagram.
I'll post a picture of Arthur and something next to him that weighs 26 pounds. That way you guys...
But, like, you wouldn't want a dog much bigger than Arthur in your apartment.
No, absolutely not. If you don't know our co-host, Arthur, he is a wiry little terrier mutt. And he's like I just said, about 26 pounds, small guy. And you don't want, if it were me, I wouldn't want bigger than a dog.
And your space is probably a lot bigger than what they had at the Cecil.
So Price knew that the dog barked all the time because Channing was only a floor above her office on floor 2. And she could hear the dog. She could literally hear this dude's dog just barking. And the first time she saw Channing bring it in, she sent him a notification reminding him that dogs were not allowed in the building. So that's how quickly she acted, just like Sam's neighbors. Like right away, boom, hey, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, it's the rules.
Them's the rules.
It's what you signed the piece papers. Like you signed a piece of paper that says you can't do this.
Right. It doesn't only say that you get amazing rent for the rest of your life. It says that you can't have a dog either. I'm sure. I haven't seen the leasing agreement, but I'm positive.
I say, well, at this point, they don't even require an ID, so
no,
maybe
exactly. Yeah,
but...
I was gonna say, yeah, they don't even know. They don't care what people are in the room. They don't. The next day, what I find to be a very funny reversal from previous notifications, which was like no response at all. The very next day that Channing gets this notification, Price was forestalled when she received new documentation from him saying this new pet was an emotional support animal.
Which is fair to an extent. Like it's very easy to get an emotional support animal certificate. It's kind of too easy.
Yeah.
Because it's just a loophole for people.
Well, and here's what's odd about the situation and why I kept the dog in here. Because I wanted to remove it. I didn't want to refer to this dog at all. But the documentation for the emotional support animal listed that Mr. Channing had no close relatives to help him with his conditions. Price immediately thought about the woman in the room he had been referring this whole time to as his wife or alternately his sister. So
who is he referring? Like, who is he talking to saying that she's his wife or his sister? To Price or other people?
So predominantly to the health department, he is asserting that she is his wife. And most of the time in here, he's asserting that it is his wife. I am unable to ascertain how many times he referred to her as his sister. I'm imagining that that's coming from Pedro's knowledge of these years of interacting with this man when his story is changed. But for most of this time, he's referring to all these officials in their capacity that this is his wife. And now he's giving her documentation that says he has no close relatives.
Well, my argument with that is she might not be able to help him with his conditions if she has her own conditions. And he may be helping her more than she's helping him in this kind of his reality of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't think that's like a total like crazy thing to have to say on his end.
That she can't help him. Yeah, that would be fair because we still don't know like we don't really know who is leading this sort of toxic relationship between the two of them.
Well, just based on like everything that you've given me so far, because like I don't know anything about this case. I know a lot about the Cecil, but this is something I haven't heard of before. And everything that you've given me so far in this is very much like he is the one running things day to day. He's the one who goes out, brings back food. And it sounds like if she is not kidnapped,
right,
and if she is there on her own free will, then she seems more mentally ill than he does in these few facts you've given me so far.
Right.
So that's why I say, like, that is no surprise to me that he says he has no close relatives to help him with his conditions because she can't. If everything is, if she's there on her own free will, or if he is like a medical caregiver in that aspect.
Yeah, we don't really know who's like leading in this dance. But yeah, I mean everything says to me from what I thought, he seemed more in a mental place of, like you said, he's going out, he's bringing back food. I don't, it's like I don't know what's happening here. But that was his argument for having the dog. And the cycle then repeats itself again, only this time including the dog. The room was still boiling. Channing refused to clean and continued to remove roach killing gel that was applied by the hotel's fumigator. But Price was undeterred and she called the health department again. They gave him another ticket and it again went nowhere. But this is the second ticket he's received from the health department. Most frustrating to me is that, per Price's book, neither health department visit had addressed the women hiding, and it also did not say if they attempted to make contact with her. So,
I don't think that's what they're there to do.
right.
Like, it would be great if they did, but that's not their reason for going in there in reality. Their reason for going in is to check living conditions, not the
Mm-hmm.
mental health and well-being of the person beyond the conditions that they're living in.
Well, I would say that the conditions you're living in contribute a lot.
I agree with that, but that's not really what they're there for. They're there for the conditions. You're right. The conditions contribute, but they can't say, "Are you happy with where you live?"
But they could say, like, are you okay?
They could, but I don't disagree that they should do that, but I don't think they are required to.
That could be it. It could just be that they're not required to.
Like, I agree they should because something seems very off. They should,
Right.
but legally they don't have to. I could be wrong, but
That could be a
that's
good
that's what I
question.
think.
Brett, Alice,
Right?
what are y'all up to? I need help with this. I'm struggling out here. Because, as we've said before, Price had given Channing adequate notice before all of these room inspections. Not only because it's right, because it was in fact a legal entitlement that Channing had.
Oh, absolutely. If she didn't do that, she could be in bigger trouble.
Exactly. So before every visit where the health department would come, he would be given time to be able to make changes to the living conditions. He never once truly cleaned the space, according to Price. But every time Price entered with the health department, the bucket by the bed was empty. Had it been full, the way Price had originally found it, the health department would have, quote, had a more severe response than a fix-it ticket, and Mr. Channing likely knew this, end quote.
Oh, that totally makes sense that he made that action to remove it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he's aware to an extent. Like, he's like, oh, just received another inspection notice. Better make sure this is the date. Better make sure that's gone by then.
Mm-hmm.
So it does show some foreplanning here on his part.
Yeah, definitely.
It frustrates me just reading this cycle that the process is stuck in where no one is getting help. And now we've added an animal to the mix. I just feel really bad for Amy, who's doing all that she can to try to help whoever needs help in room 242, because somebody does. That much is clear.
Right. I still just can't get over, like, this is all grounds for eviction. Like, it has to be. I can't get over that part of it.
Right. It's all grounds for eviction. And also, we're operating a hotel around all of this. So, like, this is one room.
Do you know if other apartments or rooms also needed to be fumigated? Like, was the roach issue concentrated to this room? It surprised me if it was.
No, I don't. It would also surprise me if it was. Because the book just said that the Cecil was infested with various pests.
So that makes me assume that there's other issues in other rooms.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I'm wondering if nobody like reported the smell. Because maybe other people are already dealing with this other stuff, and they're like, well, I don't want to call front desk about how smelly my neighbor's room is when I've got cockroaches in my room, and that person doesn't even know why because it's the man next door.
Right. Because I'm just like thinking about this. Like we're focusing on this room, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole
This
lot more
one room,
rooms in the building. And
600,
Amy Price is
rooms.
not only dealing with this room.
No.
She's dealing with a lot of
Yeah.
other terrible things that are happening on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And I understand how this could take longer to try to fix because you can't be
Right.
solely focused on it.
No.
But it
Yeah.
seems like so many things were kind of pushed aside or ignored for so long. There has to be a ton of other things that are adding to that we don't know about.
Right. And yeah, like you said, this is just one room. And if you listen to part one, Amy had become accustomed in her time working at the Cecil, dealing with such severe mental illness that she was regularly accustomed to ducking objects that were being thrown at her. So,
Yeah.
I mean, on your agenda, as far as like triaging things, the thing being thrown at you probably is more concerning than room 242 out of 600.
That's exactly why I'm bringing it up. It's like there's just so many other things that like I can
Right.
understand. Okay, I have to deal with this for this 2 hour period today, but I can't look back at it for another 2 weeks after this.
Right. Yeah, you kind of have to compartmentalize and you have to be really good at it. And as this continued and the time passed, the Cecil had to be repiped. And to do this, one of its maintenance workers, Johnny, would need to gain access to 242 to do some caulking. Johnny did not shy away from giving a statement after entering the room. He said in part that he had entered the room in January at 10:30 a.m. to conduct some caulking to the pipe in the unit. After knocking, Mr. Channing opened the door to him and he indicated that the pipe he had to work on was behind the dresser across the room, which allowed him to view the condition of the entire room. Mr. Channing referred to the woman okay, so this is to Johnny. He refers to the woman as his wife and the dog as his emotional support animal. So that's the story here he's giving Johnny. We're going with wife and emotional support animal. The emotional support animal story has never changed. So Johnny had a similar story to all Cecil staff members that entered this room. He said Mr. Channing's wife lay on the bed, quote, covering herself from head to toe to avoid being seen. The bed was filled with cockroaches that crawled all over her body. And he also witnessed a bucket by the sink that, quote, contained human waste. The condition of this unit was very disturbing and appeared uninhabitable. Please see the attached diagram drawn by Johnny for details. So, like, now we've got an additional person here who's like, this is not okay. What's going on? And we have somebody who's so upset that he's like drawn what it was like.
Right.
And what I imagine is they took this report so they could start piling up statements from anyone and everyone to give to Adult Protective Services.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like that should be day one of witnessing that.
Right. And it's worth mentioning here again that we now have another outside adult with true concerns about the residents of 242 that were those of common decency. Johnny is the only additional staff member that saw the bucket used for waste. Upon hearing this, Price again reached out to the health department, the third time, only to hear there was not much the health department could do if they didn't see the waste. If they didn't see it, they could not reason it as a fact and hold it against Channing just because multiple other parties had now seen it.
Yeah, see that's kind of what I'm thinking is like they have to look at the physical evidence
right
when they're in there. And so
yeah,
talking with her and seeing if she's emotionally okay is kind of not part of their job.
They can't hold what you might potentially do against you, you know? And he clearly knows that.
even if she's in a position where she's not being held against her will, but she has severe medical needs, which is
Mm-hmm.
what makes it so she can't go down the hallway to go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
That's where adult protective services needs to come in a whole lot more
Right.
than the health department.
Right. Right. And so multiple parties have seen it, but like we just said, they can't hold anything that you potentially might do against you. And he very likely knew it.
Seems like he did.
So Amy continued to worry and become upset by the woman in 242 and the dog and her inability to help them. And time was passing, and Price felt keenly that, quote, living creatures were being abused under her watch, which she called, quote, unbearable. Which I don't blame her.
I don't blame her at all for feeling that way.
That does sound, yeah, that does sound unbearable. To have somebody, you don't ever want that. So, trying another route, Price called Animal Protective Services for the dog. And we're going to kind of blow past that because whatever we know, all Price remembers next is that the dog, quote, exited the picture and that she doesn't remember what happened to it, but she recalls feeling glad that it was gone and hoping it had gone somewhere better for it.
Yeah, hopefully it was able to be taken to a shelter and adopted.
Exactly. I mean, it's a shelter would be mercy. Like, this is crazy. And when Price thought she had hit her limit, Channing had more for her. Not long after Animal Protective Services came, Price came to greet Mr. Channing after a call had been placed to the front desk. He handed her a stack of papers and said, quote, "You've been served, see you in court," unquote. Price looked into it, and technically, you, the plaintiff, aren't supposed to serve the person you're suing yourself.
No, not at all.
You're not a process server. Like, that's not. But she's quickly becoming aware that he's sort of playing in a different ballgame, and people are, for some reason, everybody seems to just be, cutting this guy. Yeah, we love our dogs. My husband just arrived home with Arthur, so if you all heard any of that, that's what chopped us up a little bit there. But, so, after Mr. Channing serves her, which he's not a process server, she became aware that he was serving her papers for a restraining order against her. So, again, it calls into, like, first of all, you're not supposed to serve the person you're suing. I mean,
I wonder, is this like a real lawsuit? Like, or did he just like print this off the internet?
actually, they do go before a judge. So,
Okay, so it is a real lawsuit.
right. Yeah. So I'll let you know the outcome, and you maybe you'll understand better than I do, because I just don't. It's wild. Like, you're not supposed to, especially if you're serving them for a restraining order against them. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
That's what the
like
process server is for.
you shouldn't. Yeah, you shouldn't be near them if you're serving with a restraining order.
Right. If you don't, it doesn't make any sense. And so he claimed in these papers that Price was harassing him by coming to his room all the time, and that she'd harassed him about his emotional service animal.
So she has documentation, and that there was a warning given before coming to his unit.
Oh, yeah. I imagine she's armed to the teeth.
I say it sounds like she would easily win.
Yeah, exactly. And, we talked in part 1 about how going to court had become almost very commonplace for Amy Price's job description, which
Yeah.
is wild. But she would have been ready. And in these papers, Del Channing, the woman referred to as Del Channing, was referred to instead as Dahlia Harry. Price couldn't understand if Channing had forgotten the other pseudonym for her, or if he was intentionally using another alias in this lawsuit.
Or I wonder if that's her legal name.
Yes, is it? We don't know yet.
Say if it's in court documents, you would assume it would need to be a legal name.
You would think, right? You would think. And so she presents herself at court along with Channing. They approach the judge, and the judge inquires, Quote, so I understand, Mr. Channing, that you would like a restraining order against Miss Price. Channing offered the judge, quote, no, no. Ugh, I don't want a restraining order against Miss Price. Not her. I want a restraining order against the security guard who's posting notices on my door. They're always trying to inspect my room. End quote.
So it sounds like he just doesn't understand what's happening.
Yeah, I'm like, so you clearly understand how the legal system works to an extent. Like you've clearly got some idea of that, but you don't really know. Like you're oblivious to the fact that they have the legal right to inspect your room. You are their tenant.
Yeah.
Price knew that she was the one requesting the notices be posted on the door, but she didn't know if Channing was aware that they came from her. She did find it confusing, quote, from a technical angle. It was confusing that he had served me if the person he'd really intended to sue was the security guard, end quote. Which I think is fair. We both just reasoned that out. And I have to think that this guy wasn't planning on suing anyone. He was just hell-bent on them not entering that room again. And so he put in, like, the name he knew most commonly, which was Amy Price, which is pretty easy to remember. I don't know.
Well, it sounds like to me he doesn't understand what a restraining order really does. It sounds like he wants to find a way just to prevent people from coming into his unit.
Mm-hmm.
But he just thinks a restraining order might make that happen.
Right. That's why I think that I'm like, I don't think he ever intended for any of the legal system to go to work. He just wanted to scare the hotel. And if he thought he was going to scare the hotel, that's a pretty bad plan because they have all this documentation and they're armed and ready. They would love you to do this because what you're doing is going to further expose that unit and more people are going to enter it no matter what if you enter into this legal battle.
Right. If this guy's in his early 70s at this point, he's been there for 40 years, he would have moved in 40 years previously. That would put him moving in his early 30s. Like, I'm just wondering, like, okay, what did this guy do for a living? How is he paying for this apartment?
Right.
Like, I know it's cheap, but like, I just have so many questions about what his history is.
Me too, because the thing is, they collected rent monthly, just like we do from these tenants. So, like, he had a sense of time in that he knew that, like, monthly he needed to be paying his rent, whatever amount it was. He knew.
Well, also,
rent was due.
Part of why I'm wondering all of this is he actually considered a caregiver by the state for this woman? Because you can get paid for that, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Is he not working and is he generating income by quote unquote caregiving for her, and there's just no checks that should be happening if that's the case? Like, what's right. I have so many questions.
Yeah, so do I. Like, I'm so glad somebody's here with me now because I've just been thinking about this for days. I'm like, what is that? Like, oh God. And the judge is probably, he doesn't want to touch it either. And he stated simply, quote, if the restraining order is not meant for Miss Price, then you need to refile it. He then closed the case and told both parties to go home, which is exactly what I would have done if I were a judge. Like, all right, goodbye.
Yeah, like this piece of paper that you handed me means nothing. Yeah, I have more stuff to deal with.
I got 3 murders today. Like, get out of my line and refile your restraining order in a different defendant's name.
Wait, also, so the quote unquote wife was listed on there. Did she not have to appear in court?
She did not. Well, she either did not have to appear or she did not appear.
Because was it just his name against hers, or is she only referenced in the restraining order? Because those are two very different things. Because if one person doesn't show up at court for that restraining order hearing, it's null and void until they show up.
Yeah, Amy didn't go too in depth into that in her book. She just said that the judge told them if it's not meant for Miss Price, you need to refile it.
I'm assuming that she wasn't listed as the one of the people getting the restraining order. It must only be him then.
Yeah, it does say that he mentions her in there, but it doesn't say that she is listed as one of the plaintiffs.
Yeah, that could just be part of like the written statement that goes along with it.
Exactly. That's what I think. I think that she is mentioned and she's referred to, like we just mentioned, with this other alias. I think she's mentioned in his statement. Not.
Did he bring a lawyer? Do you know?
No, he did not. I do know that.
Okay, so usually you don't for a restraining order. It's not. It's like very, very serious cases if you do, but you don't. You don't have to. A lot of people don't for restraining orders.
Yeah, he did not. And so this is another thing that makes me think he had foresight enough and like intention in his actions, because Channing never again attempted legal action against Amy Price. However, after reading all of her book, I have to assume she would have happily met Channing in court again if it meant helping the woman in 242.
Yeah, I think that everything that Amy's done is legally within her right as the general manager of the Cecil. And I think that she could have easily represented herself in court and say, I did everything legally correct. Here's my documentation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that it seems like she's taking the steps that she needs to take.
Exactly. So I bet she's just sitting there like, I wish you would. I wish you would try to meet me in court again. All I am sitting on is paperwork documenting what a piece of garbage you are.
Hey, I've had to go to court for people doing stuff in the stores I've worked at. And I'm like, I'll show you the video camera of you stealing stuff.
You're like,
sure.
You're ready. You're like, I would love to show you the footage. Thank you, Your Honor, for giving me the floor. Here's the videotape. Thank you. Like,
I have sat there in court waiting for that moment. I never had to go through with it because they pled guilty.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Like, I've been in those moments.
Yeah. And Amy, like we said, is accustomed to defending the Cecil in court. And in this case, he filed the restraining order in her name. So he's like suing her. But also, is he really? Because the whole thing would have been null and void anyway. They could maybe have called it out on the fact that a process server did not serve her. I don't know. That's all theoretical.
Yeah, I wonder, because see, a restraining order is not suing. So you might not need to be served in the same way as you would for a lawsuit. That might just be a different thing.
I don't know. That's another very good question. Maybe a Brett and Alice question.
Yeah, because that's like it's definitely like you're still going in front of a judge because you need to prove why you need a restraining order, but it's not a lawsuit. It does go on a record, but it's not at all the same thing as a lawsuit. And it is typically meant to be temporary.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. From my understanding, most of them are intended to be a temporary situation.
And even if he had like brought forward saying, yes, I do want a restraining order against Amy, because of just the conditions, what she's able to say, come forward saying, okay, we had these inspections. Here were the notices before the inspections occurred. I feel like the restraining order would have been turned down.
Yeah, I do
even
too.
if he had tried to follow through with it and say, yes, I want her name on it.
Right. I want her specifically. Like, no. I just think she's sitting on way too much ammunition to take this guy down. And I think he realized that. And that's why he never attempted legal action again.
Right.
Because he might have understood, like, he may have grasped, again, we don't know how much he grasps reality. We don't know if he has his arms around it. We do know that he's the one who goes out and gets food. Does that make him mentally stable? We don't know. There are a lot of...
I feel like he could have seen something like this on TV and was like, that's what I'll do.
Perhaps. Because if you recall, there was TV blaring.
Well, that's exactly what I was just thinking of. Like, there was one that he was clearly watching at that first visit.
Yeah, he was watching Law and Order. And was like, oh, okay, I know what to do now. And
Yeah, this might get her to stop. Get whoever to stop.
right, because that's really all he's trying to do is try and get them to stop coming in the room. Which, you're a tenant, they're your landlord, and Amy Price could easily have gone to court and been like, I'm a representative of this man's landlord. He should be suing the entity, the Cecil Hotel, not me. I don't know.
And you can't get a restraining order against the Cecil Hotel.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be a lawsuit at that point.
Like, all of this, it's so confusing. It's like, what did you think? So she continued her actions to get him to clean the room. Nothing happened. She was unable to get the health department to do anything to help the woman under the sheets. So she tries a different move, and Adult Protective Services were finally convinced to come and investigate. Price had to call them numerous times. So she doesn't ever say how many times she called them, but she called them at least twice regarding these conditions.
I just really quickly, I just Googled how to serve a restraining order in California. And it does very clearly state, after you get a court date for your restraining order, you must have someone give a copy of your court papers to the person you need protection from. This is called serving papers. A sheriff or a marshal can do it for free, but you can also choose someone else to serve it for you. So it shouldn't have been him, but he could have had a friend do it.
Right. Yeah.
He could have had a neighbor. He could have knocked on a neighbor's door and saying, I need you to do this for me.
Yeah, go serve the woman at the front desk. Or even Amy Price had her own office. So he could have been like, just go to this room with these papers.
Yeah, go up to the person at the front desk and say, give it to her.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, adult protective officials arrive. No one answers the door. And then Adult Protective Services fully never tried again. Never. They never picked it back up, never came back, never anything. All they did was knock, nobody answered, and they went back home.
See, that's so frustrating. But at the same time, you have to think about everything that they're also dealing with. It's hard to make these home calls, but like there needs to be follow-up.
And yeah, exactly. And it makes you, it harkens back to when we talked about what Amy said, which was getting the woman help if she didn't want it was going to be hard to do. And that's sort of what we're seeing here, is that there is kind of what I think is a feedback loop of mental illness in room 242. These two are just kind of feeding off each other. And Amy is trying to do her job.
Exactly. A lot of this makes me think of the Candyman case here in Chicago in Cabrini Green. Do you know about that one? Like the original Candyman story?
It pings for me like the graffiti, right? Am I thinking of the right thing?
No, I don't think so. There might have been graffiti involved, but if it was, it wasn't a big case.
No, I was thinking of the smiley face murders.
Oh, yeah, that's very, very different.
I was thinking of that one.
No, the prosecutors had a fantastic episode this last October for the Candyman. Highly recommend everyone to go listen to it. But that was at a building here called Cabrini Green. It was a projects housing. And a woman was murdered in her apartment, and the neighbors were smelling foul odors, trying to get police to knock on the door. The police did knock on the door, but because no one answered, no one did a proper wellness check and actually went inside the apartment, and she was lying dead there for weeks. And this is it's making me think a lot of that case, what I'm hearing here.
Yep. So, yeah, Adult Protective Services, they do their thing. I understand they're just trying to do their job. They knocked on the door and nobody answered. But also, your Adult Protective Services, is this case not sitting in a limbo for you of, like, a stack of follow-up things? Because, again, these are modern times. Like, do you not have, like, a Trello board where you've, like,
How many times do you hear Child Protective Services doing the same exact thing?
Several.
Like, unfortunately, it's the same system for adults and children, essentially. It's just different groups of people doing the same job. But we hear this all the time.
Yeah, yeah. And, yeah.
I hate it. I don't know how to fix it, but it needs to be fixed somehow.
And Amy is clearly in the same spot. because in yet another move showing her devotion at helping this woman, or just trying to get any response out of this woman, Price called the fire department specifically to help this woman. The firemen came, took the woman's vitals, pronounced that she was, quote, doing fine, and then they left. Price said at this point she felt like she was, quote, going crazy. And she wondered how everyone she was calling could be letting this happen to this woman. She also wondered how she had tried so hard in so many ways to help the woman and gotten nowhere. It was a standstill between her and Channing that would go on for years.
I don't think it's that she's not getting anywhere with this. She's getting the documentation that she needs to move forward at some point. And unfortunately, I think you need a lot of documentation, especially when it comes to adults.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't say she's not getting anywhere. I would say I wish it moved faster. I wish the system was better enforced to take action at a faster rate than what we're seeing here.
Right. And I would absolutely say that I agree with you. And I would like to highlight that that was just Amy Price's feelings at the time, her own feelings. I agree with Sam. I think that...
I can understand why she feels that way for sure.
Yeah, I totally understand it. But I'm fully in agreement with you that she's doing everything how she's supposed to, you know? And
yeah,
that's why I feel so damn bad for her, because she is just doing her damn job.
Right.
This is, like, she shouldn't be made to feel like she's going crazy. There shouldn't be situations where this has happened. And now it's going on for years. But in a watershed moment, the hotel again changed ownership. And Price saw this, again, as another opportunity to help the woman hidden in 242. The new building owners started a relocation incentive program in order to implore the long-range tenants of the Cecil to leave the building. A social worker began to meet with each of these tenants individually, so there's 80 of them, and they're meeting with all of them, to help decide on what was the best path for them. If the tenant chose to vacate the Cecil, they would be offered compensation. When this whole program was announced, Price told the new owners and the social workers what she'd seen in 242.
So that's a pretty good deal that you don't get a lot.
Exactly. That's what I mentioned before when we were talking about tenants' rights. Like, there must be something in law here because they're being compensated to leave. So, like, what kind of tenants' rights must they have? Like, crazy protective tenants' rights. Because, yeah, they should have been evicted years ago. Yeah, like...
Yeah, I'm still blown away that they weren't evicted. First thing, I'm blown away that their rent never increased.
Yeah.
There's something really bizarre here that I don't understand.
Yeah, so this guy who should have been evicted years ago is now getting offered money to leave. Yeah. So that's happening. And so she tells these social workers about what's going on. Because, the same way Pedro briefed her before she went in there, wouldn't she want somebody to catch you and be like, hey,
absolutely.
Well,
and if they're social workers, you would hope that they have training to deal with something like that more than Amy might.
Right. And if not training, then, the resources to, tell you where to go.
Or contact them themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's all Amy was hoping for. And it actually works.
Good.
Shockingly. The day came that the social workers met with Mr. Channing and the woman together in their room. And this marked the first occasion where Amy Price saw the woman in room 242's face. According to Price, quote, she looked too happy, which suggested to me that she probably wasn't mentally well. And her hair, it was so long and piled on top of her head like Marge Simpson's, but not styled. More like it hadn't been washed or combed in a long time, end quote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder how long she's essentially been in that bed.
Right. And then she did not speak the entire meeting with the social worker, this woman. Meanwhile, she's not speaking. And Mr. Channing explains that he would like to receive the compensation check for leaving. However, to enter that agreement, everyone would need to produce a valid ID, including the woman.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. Hey, you want to get money from us? Free money? Well, you have to leave, but to get money from us, you're going to need to identify yourself.
Yeah.
That seems fair.
So we need to know what name to put on that check.
Right, exactly. Yeah. What bank account do you want this to go to? And this could have been Amy Price's way in to find out more about this woman. At least like a valid name, because right now we've heard several variations. And then, was it really her family who called way back at the beginning? Was the person who showed up at the hotel really a part of any of this? All of that could begin to be examined if she were just to present an ID. The social worker saw it as another way to get her into a more humane situation as well. They said, quote, let's get her an ID and maybe a haircut, too. Mr. Channing was said to have balked at this, claiming that the woman had lost her ID many years earlier. During the entire interaction with Adult Protective Services and the social worker, so 2 separate occasions, all the time talking to Adult Protective Services, all the time talking to the social workers, he had referred to this woman as his wife. My question would be, if she was his wife, why was he so skittish when official documentation entered the picture?
Yeah, that's odd.
Yeah, why?
He does seem like very protective, and this it really sounds like he's dealing with some sort of mental illness.
Right.
Whether there is the kidnapping, like that phone call mentioned, or not. Yeah. I haven't decided at this point. I don't think there's enough information to really decide that because we haven't heard from her yet.
Right.
But I do understand a little bit of his potential nervousness with an ID, because it does really kind of sound like he has an issue with authority, and documentation in an ID is like a big no-no if you have an issue with authority. But then that's also weird that he's trying to get a restraining order, because then you're going to the authority for help. It doesn't really make sense. But I don't think we can make sense of what he's thinking.
Exactly. I have no idea what this man is thinking. I have a strong feeling that the woman is mentally ill, and like I said before, I have a feeling that this is some sort of codependent feedback loop where they're both mentally ill, because I can't imagine staying in those conditions if you are mentally stable.
Yeah.
Maybe they all think this too, but due to her losing her ID, the social workers set up multiple appointments over the next weeks, each time trying to secure a date on which they could take the woman out of the room and get her a haircut and some fresh clothes. Every appointment had to be canceled, or sometimes Channing and the woman would simply not show up for the scheduled meeting. Eventually, Channing dropped the idea of the relocation reimbursement and did not leave the Cecil. Didn't.
I don't even know what the next steps would be.
Right?
For Adult Protective Services.
Exactly. That's another
forcibly remove them? That seems extreme and potentially more harmful.
And the thing is, you can try to forcibly remove him, but you're at the Cecil, so you're going to call the cops maybe 3 times, and they might show up. A guy won't leave? Well, okay.
Well, I bet if Adult Protective Services called, that'd be a bit of a different story. But still, that could be emotionally and mentally harmful as well to do that.
So Channing doesn't leave the Cecil. However, Amy Price did. In 2015, her career with the hotel was over due to its closure. So she stayed on board what she had called her Titanic until the last possible moment and oversaw its changing of hands into new owners. However, it was going to be closed as a hotel.
It's still closed as a hotel, I think.
Yeah, so we'll talk about it a little. I'll dust over it because I know this has been a long episode. Thanks for hanging with us. But Pedro was retained on staff for the hotel's new owners. So that's 2015. Amy Price leaves. She's there for 10 years. So Mr. Channing had already been there 40 years. And then Amy shows up. Amy's there for another 10 years trying to get this guy the hell out. And she's not even successful. She leaves the position. And this guy is still holding down the fort in 242.
Do you have any age estimate on the woman?
I'm not sure. No.
Because I'm wondering if, like, is she
That's a good
a
question.
decent amount younger, close to the same age?
I wonder about so many things. I have so many questions.
So I'm writing down a lot of questions as we're talking. I'm like, I'm trying to keep things straight, trying to make sure I know what I know. I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, I know. It's like, what? Wait. Like, wait. If this is in 2015, like, he's still there? Like, what? And so in 2017, 2 years after that, Pedro and a houseman named Julio walked past room 242 and detected the smell that had unfortunately become a familiar one in the Cecil, that of death. They immediately gained access to the room and found Mr. Channing dead in his bed. Next to him was the woman. Not only was she alive and well, but she was smiling at the men. Paramedics were called to remove Channing's body and to remove the woman. They put her on a stretcher, and she then entered their care. Pedro informed Price of the death and of the woman being removed, including one final terrifying detail. As she was wheeled out of the lobby on the stretcher, Pedro told Amy that she was laughing out loud. And Amy said Pedro was able to imitate the laughter. It was so singular. And he said that she kept doing it as she was being taken away for medical support. Price said that this last experience with the woman behind the door really shook her. She said, quote, "The fact that she was cackling away after being in that atrocious situation for way too many years and found lying next to that creep's body." End quote.
See, honestly, that makes me really wonder if he was trying to, I don't want to use the word protect, but kind of protect her. It sounds like she is pretty severely mentally ill. And
Yeah.
he was kind of keeping her locked away for her own sake.
Right. That's what I'm wondering. I'm like what I want to know is just like who I don't know who is pulling the strings on this one, you know? I don't know if he's protecting her or if she's using him. You know, I don't know. Or are they both?
Well, that also makes me wonder with like what you were saying with her being seen in the hallways on a rare occasion. Like, are these instances where she leaves the room and he needs to go find her because she's wandering? Like I'm kind of thinking like a dementia patient. Like there are times that they leave, they don't know what's happening. They're very confused. Like,
potentially
could
volatile.
it be something like
yeah.
I don't know. I feel like he had his own issues,
right?
But maybe he tried to protect her and keep her safe by locking her away.
Yeah. It also, like, the other variable that's like kicking around in my head again and again and again is like, who is hoarding this apartment out? Like, which one of you? Like, from a landlord's perspective, like, which one of you is hoarding my apartment out? Like,
I would put that on him, just based on what I know.
Too. I think so,
because he seemed more mentally capable of living a day-to-day life than her, just based on what we know.
Right. So, like I said, folks, we're getting closer. We're wrapping it up. So, here's a few more weird things to talk about. Additionally, no one ever came to collect Channing's belongings. So, maybe he had not been lying when he said he had no family.
Yeah, so that doesn't surprise me. That was my first thought, is he already stated he has nobody.
Right. Doesn't surprise me either. However, equally bizarre, no one ever came to inquire about the woman. Not the people who had called or those who had arrived at the hotel or anyone seemed interested in her, where she went, what her real name was. And Price and myself as well are just in disbelief that there was never a follow up with the Cecil or any of its staff about her. It was 2 years past when Amy left the Cecil, and she was still worried what happened to her and where she was. In the book, she questions, quote, "Did I do enough? What more could I have done? When I think of the woman now, these are the same questions that still haunt me. It never felt right, and it still doesn't. Pedro has encouraged me to try to get to the bottom of it, but like a lot of other things, it was never resolved." Unquote.
I really wonder if that call from Asia had any relation at all. Because we know
Yeah.
the history of the Cecil. We went through that in the last episode.
Yeah.
It has
yeah.
a crazy history.
Yeah.
It could be completely unrelated. It could be prank calls.
It could be anybody. It could be anybody.
I'm not convinced they're related to this woman in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, because when you think about it, the only connection there with the call from Asia is that the woman is Asian. So yeah, they might not even be related at all. They could be.
I'm not convinced they're related. I'm leaning much. I'm very much convinced that they're not related.
Yeah, I mean it's completely plausible that they're not.
I think if they were, there would have been more people showing up. There would have been more calls.
Yeah.
If it was something that was serious,
right,
and ongoing that long.
Yeah, a name would have been attached to it or something.
Yeah.
Like, please check on my mother, aunt, sister, daughter. She is at the Cecil. She is this description.
Well, the thing is, like, we also know that Skid Row is feet
a block away.
And what do we know about Skid Row? That there are a lot of people who are unhomed. There are a lot of people who are runaways. There are a lot of people who are drug addicts. And with all of that, there's a lot of trafficking that can also happen.
You're right.
And how easy would it be for somebody to get a little bit of money, get a room at the Cecil, and have a trafficking victim there?
Yeah.
So simple.
Yeah. So, again, like, totally see why Amy was very distraught over this. And it took up space in her brain, because, like...
Oh, I fully understand why.
Like she said, like, living people were being abused under what she felt was, like, her watch. But also, it breaks my heart that she was like, did I do enough? Did I do everything? Because I feel like she did everything she could.
I do too, but I also think that's a very natural human reaction for somebody who is caring.
Yeah. So we're left with, like, we don't know this woman's real name. She never presented a valid identification. Like we just said, a lot of people on Skid Row, they don't have one. We don't know if she had any family. We can't say that the call is related. And we don't know what condition she was in mentally at the point of Channing's death, or if he had a large part of caring for her, or if he was the problem. We also don't know the state of Channing's body or cause of death. Amy Price was always aware that there were bodies being removed from the Cecil, but she said she couldn't look at them. And that often she just saw the body bags wheeled out.
Yeah, you don't want to have them wheeled out without a body bag. Like, just in general, as a coroner, like, you want that covered up. You don't want people gawking. You don't want people seeing things.
Right.
That's respect for both the person who has passed and whatever investigation may need to come from it.
Exactly. And I think that was just her position. Like, she didn't need to see it. And she also made every effort that the coroner's teams would use the back entrance of the Cecil when transporting the body bags so that they would not pass through the guest's view.
Oh, absolutely.
So she has no visibility on that. And she also, at this point, had moved on from her job 2 years prior. So elsewhere in the book, it was said that Pedro most often dealt with the bodies and saw their condition. He gave no description of the body to Price, which I think is fair. It does inspire more questions, though. Was he sick? What was the official cause of death? Was there a chance of foul play? And if so, was the woman involved?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, my immediate thought, just based on like knowing that he had to be close to his 80s or in his 80s, and given
Right, that's all. Yeah.
his apparent lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
that's a reasonable age being a cause of death. But you're right. Like, there could be a lot of other things
I
as a
don't know.
factor in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I just can't stop thinking about it. I'm like,
And good for Pedro to not talk about that because,
no, yeah, that's
like,
indiscreet.
yeah, well, like, as I've said, I don't even know how many times on our show before, I'm close to somebody who is a coroner.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, they have a legal obligation to not say things. But more than that, it's also a moral obligation. And
Yeah.
that's very, very important to them to show that respect. And Pedro
Yeah.
not being somebody who has that legal obligation that comes along with it, I think that shows a lot of respect to not talk about it.
Yeah, I think that he shows remarkable strength of character in being the Cecil's. I mean, you could almost call him the Cecil steward. Like all these years, he was considered the hotel's unofficial historian when Amy Price got there.
Mm-hmm.
So he's really like when you think of the hospitality industry, you should be thinking of somebody like Pedro, like somebody who will literally find like a dead body and not talk about it to anyone to make sure that the hotel is intact. Like that's the whole basis of his job and he does it. You know, people who work hard, like I really respond to that, you know?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
so we're wrapping it up and my questions just largely mirror Amy Price's. I wonder where the woman is and if she's alive. I wonder if Channing was helping her or if she had Stockholm syndrome.
Could be both, really.
Yeah. Is it neither or is it both? Was anyone looking for her at all? Did no one care? And those two questions are sad by themselves because you have a block away you have Skid Row, which is full of people who did did and was anyone looking for them? Did no one care? And I in does it sound like rampant untreated mental illness between two people or does it sound like a kidnapper and a hostage? In my opinion, I definitely think the former, just from the behavior they were exhibiting.
Yeah.
I wish the hotel had done what Miss Price wanted so badly to do, which was help the woman or even both people in room 242. Sam, what are your final thoughts on this one? This has been my holiday reading, so I've been thinking about it since, and I wonder what impression it's made on you, like what's pinged for you. I can't stop thinking about this and how truly tragic it all is.
Yeah, I agree. It's incredibly tragic. I honestly, just based on what you've given us today, I think that this is definitely, not definitely, I think this is likely a case of mental illness and even maybe some sort of physical illness. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he was likely trying to treat her himself by locking her away.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's because he loved her. Maybe that's because she is his wife. Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't really know that, but
I know,
I'm
right?
not leaning towards kidnapper or hostage situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me neither.
I'm leaning definitely towards an illness of some sort.
Because if we recall very early on, the first description we got of Mr. Channing was that he walked with a limp and had a cane. So there is some evidence of physical illness there.
Yeah, it could have even
But
been like he was worried they would take her away because of
mm-hmm.
her illness. And so that's why he
Yeah.
didn't want anyone to see her because he was scared that she'd be taken from him. And maybe she is his wife and he
Mm-hmm.
really
Yeah.
loved her and he didn't want her to be taken. Like, there's a lot of different ways that this can go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's definitely, my thoughts are leaning more towards mental illness than anything else.
I know, right? And one of the reasons I wanted to cover this is not only because the Cecil is such a legendary true crime thing, I also wanted to get Amy's story out there and then just also kind of talk about this schism of our population, the untreated mentally ill who some people have maybe just thrown away, and how they all kind of seem to congregate around the Cecil, and how interesting that is to me sociologically, like where Skid Row ends up, where all of these personalities end up converging. You know, you have Richard Ramirez entering the chat at one point. You have Jack Unterweger, and you have No ID at the front desk, and a young woman who's just trying to, she was told rehab it and make it suitable for a hotel chain. She was never told she was going to have to be dealing with tenants like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the last thing I'll leave you with is the historic Cecil Hotel in downtown LA reopened as a permanent supportive housing project in 2021.
Oh, it did officially reopen.
It did. Yeah, in 2021.
I thought it was put on hold.
Yeah, no, it opened as a housing project. The facility still boasts 600 rooms reserved for the neediest of Los Angelinos. But after a year of operating in 2022, with encampments in the nearby Skid Row neighborhood growing by the day, most of the rooms are still vacant. All of that is according to the LA Times.
Interesting.
So, and then Amy's book came out in 2023, last year.
Yeah, it came out in October. I'm excited to check it out. I saw it's on Spotify Premium, so I'm going to be listening to that.
Yes.
Probably this weekend or early next week.
And we should shout out here too. This whole time we've been saying like Amy was doing everything she could for her job. She's doing so well. Another aspect of Amy was that she was really a passionate jewelry designer. And that's really what she wanted to do with her life this whole time. So you may have seen in part 1 that we tagged her jewelry page in our post, and we'll do that again. And I hope that you go and check out her jewelry and support what she called her true passion.
I was looking at it this morning, and it's beautiful. I love what she makes.
I know. Yeah, she's so cool.
Well, thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod, on TikTok at HYHATC, or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutThisCase@gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later.